Yeah.
I read your Wired article. I'm going to be honest with you. I had not heard of this North Korean push to infiltrate Western tech companies. I was fascinated by your article. So I was super excited when they said we were going to get to chat. Um, I think I'm like most people. I probably haven't heard of this. I'm not a voracious consumer of Wired. I read the articles that I see. If the title is interesting to me, is I mean, let's be honest, we're bombarded with a little bit,
Yeah.
probably more information than the human brain can process at this point. So I click on what I can. How did you actually first, if you could, paint with a as wide of a brush as you want, maybe describe the situation that you uncovered. And then I'm fascinated about how you actually encounter this for the first time as well.
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, the scam kind of runs. North Korea has a lot of agents who work to secure jobs in Western companies, remote IT jobs, basically. Your coders, programmers, folks who are um, behind the scenes, able pushing code, working with data. They kind of use the fact that lots of those jobs are remote to infiltrate companies, and so they will use fake identities of American or European citizens to kind of bluff their way into a job, to fake their way into a job, and then they'll just do that job and send the money back that they earn back to Pyongyang. And that's kind of the simple version. There are an unknown number of operatives doing this, doing a kind of a lot of jobs, and so some of the estimates are like there are maybe 4,000 North Koreans working either in North Korea or in friendly countries, and they're maybe pulling in. I think some of the numbers are like 600 million a year
Mm-hmm.
is one of the top numbers, which is a lot of money, particularly for a country like North Korea that has kind of a very limited economy. But I hadn't heard about it before until I sort of stumbled across it, and it the more I looked, the more I found out. And it's one of these things that I think if you work in computer security, you
Mm-hmm.
may well know about it. But if you work in HR or in kind of in operations, you probably haven't ever heard of it. And certainly like the vast majority of people haven't heard. So I discovered it because I bumped into an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur. He works in a web security company, and we were just chatting. I live in San Francisco. You bump into folks who work in tech a lot, and we were just chatting. And he said, this really weird thing happened to me the other day. I was interviewing um, engineers for my company, and there was like a string of them that all kind of seemed super similar and in weird ways. So they all had Anglo names, and resumes that said they lived in, the Midwest, or they lived in Florida or whatever, and they'd grown up in New York and all this stuff. And then when they got into the interview, they all had like really heavy Asian accents. They kind of deflected questions or answered in strange ways. Um, and just kind of some red flags started going up. And so and he was like, I've started looking into this, and I think maybe they're North Koreans. Like I some folks told me that this scam is happening, and maybe they were trying to get me. And so from there, I worked with him and talked to lots and lots of people in the industry, um, to try and kind of establish what was going on. So his company he never hired a North Korean, but there are lots of people. I mean, countless companies out there who are hiring these folks, bringing them in, and then and unwittingly funding Kim Jong Un and the regime over there. But yeah, we kept on digging, and so things we found were the kind of techniques that they use to both to bluff their way into jobs, and then what they do once they're in there. So you know their techniques for getting in are advancing all the time. So you know they use deep fakes to kind of create fake identity documents, or sometimes even videos. Um, They use AI chatbots to provide them with scripts, so when they're in an interview, they can kind of answer questions in a that come out of the blue. And they also use a lot of programmatic coding tests like AI. A lot of engineers will get sent a coding test, and it will do a
Mhm.
screen recording as they go through the test, and the hirer kind of looks at that, at the results of that, and how they work. And what we saw were they were clearly using like programmatic stuff to do those tests, and like pass the test, but not pass it too well, pass it like 95%, not
Like a
100% every
normal
time.
human. Yeah,
Yeah,
not an
exactly.
AI.
Exactly. So really trying to cover their tracks.
So how
And
do they do that? How do they do that in real time? Not to interrupt you, but I'm
mm,
fascinated about two aspects. The AI chatbot. So
yeah,
to answer the questions, so I'm assuming that is this another device or a submenu that's listening to the question being asked, and then it spits out a reasonable response that they think that the interviewer wants to hear.
yeah. So this was one of the questions I had, is like, really, is this what's really going on? And how well does it work? Um, because people who have been fooled, when you talk to victims, they're embarrassed, they don't want to go on
Yeah.
the record. And part of my skepticism about it is just like, okay, were you just fooled by something that you should have caught? How sophisticated are these? So actually, what we did in the end, me and entrepreneur Simon, was we set up a honeypot job listing, and got hundreds of applications in for this engineering role, and then sifted it through folks that we either thought were North Koreans, or because we knew his company was being targeted, right? So
Hmm.
we could sift it through, and we could see people, like there are connections, like who's applied for jobs before, who's got all the flags, and we interviewed a bunch of people, including some North Koreans. And so I sat on the call. I was more like an observer than a interrogator, but we went through a kind of fake job interview, and I watched what they were doing as they were doing it, to see how it worked. And from what we could tell, and what I could see, was that they had a second screen. You could see them kind of looking down towards it. It was ingesting the audio, so it was listening to the questions, and it was spitting it back. Now, whether there was somebody else helping behind the scenes, these guys work in teams, so
Yeah.
there may have been someone behind the scenes, but there were definitely, like, some of the answers that came back did seem to be kind of, uh, I don't think they would have been using ChatGPT, but ChatGPT like answers, and especially there was a couple of times when you could tell that the bot had misunderstood the question, and the person was answering the question. Yeah, they were reading the script that the chatbot was giving to them, but it kind of made no sense, So you
Yeah.
were like, it had taken some keywords and was like regurgitating some information that felt very rote, and you were like, that's just got. There was one point I was, we were back channeling during the interview, and we were like, what the hell's going on? What is this guy talking about? And then we realized, like, as we went back over the information that we were asking about, we're like, oh, okay, it's just taken, like, we asked a question about border border protocol, which is like an internet, how things get shifted from one place to another on the internet, and it misinterpreted it to be about like international border control. And
Nice.
so he's talking about like the movement of people, and we were like, oh, okay, I think it's
Yeah.
the bot's lost its way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are some super sophisticated things. They can throw deep fakes. Like I've heard and seen recordings of, they'll ask you to hold up your ID. Let's prove to me you are who you say you are, when you're going through a hiring process. And they've now, the sort of deepfake technology is good enough that they can hold up a kind of green screen driver's license and
And
just
it's right there.
project the fake ID onto it in real time, which is where it gets kind of pretty terrifying in terms of being able to flag these folks up and check them. Now, I will say, you know, I think if you were if you knew about this scam when folks apply, and if you go through the interview process, there are lots of red flags. It is like, okay, well, why are they answering these questions in this way, or why are they like? There's nothing wrong with having an accent. We've all got them. I've got one, but like, if your guy says he was brought up in Brooklyn and yet seems to really struggle with and educated in Iowa, and yet speaks with this kind of super heavy Asian accent, then like, if you know about the scam, then that's a flag, right? But if you don't know
Yeah.
about the scam, then it's certainly the first thing you don't think, hang on, maybe I'm interviewing a North Korean operative, who's dialing in from Dandong or something.